Sweden and the UK are the latest countries to promise more weapons for Ukraine after Germany and the US said they would provide advanced air defence and rocket systems. Now, this comes as Ukrainian forces struggle to beat back Russia's advance in the eastern Donbas region. The governor there says 80% of the industrial hub of Sievierodonetsk is now under Russian control. Addressing Luxembourg's parliament, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy called for more weapons and more sanctions.
As of today, the occupiers control almost 20% of our territory. That's almost 125,000 square kilometers. This is much larger than the area of all the Benelux countries combined. And almost 300,000 square meters are contaminated with unexploded mines and ammunitions.
Straight to Kyiv then, where we join DW correspondent Matthias at Bullinger. Welcome, Matthias. So let's start with Sievierodonetsk and Ukraine's east. What's happening?
Yeah, Sievierodonetsk is fought about very fiercely. Russia seems to be controlling most of the city. We've just heard 80%. But we are hearing that Ukrainian forces are still in the city and are still resisting the Russians. So the governor has said that the Ukrainian forces have not given up on the city. So expect this place to be really in fierce battles now.
Right, and so how are civilians coping with this Russian onslaught?
All along the line, there are civilians still living in these places. We've heard that around 12,000, maybe 15,000 people were still in Sievierodonetsk last weekend, which is probably a number that is close to what is the number that are still there now, because evacuations have been very difficult. The shelling is intense, of course, in Sievierodonetsk, but also along the line, although it's less than in this most embattled city. So clearly, this is taking a huge toll on the civilians there. Many are living in bomb shelters, have been living in bomb shelters for weeks. Still, many of them have decided not to leave. And I have been to one village where civilians and the military are now living side by side.
Right. Well, let's see your report then. All right. Doesn't look like that's...
When the war broke out, Hortytsa immediately registered as a volunteer for Ukraine's territorial defense forces. Now he's guarding this village on the front line in Donbas.
They shoot from tanks, they shoot anti-tank missiles, cannons. I'm not a career officer, so it is difficult for me to distinguish all of them by sound.
Hortytsa, his nickname, is just one of around 100,000 volunteers who've joined units like his since the beginning of the war. Many are fighting for the first time.
This is from a rocket.
The village is just 3 kilometers from the front line. It's an important defense position.
The locals were suspicious of us in the beginning. They were watching us. We were patrolling the streets looking after the place, and they were hiding. But as things got worse here, with electricity and food, we started to help out here and there, and slowly trust has been building.
Now soldiers and the remaining villagers have got used to each other. Russian shells hit the village daily, and they hit randomly. Serhiy Mykolaievich is a veterinarian and a beekeeper.
Look, it didn't get through. Better than body armor.
The village used to be his getaway spot. Now he plans to leave.
My psyche is wrecked. We hide all the time from the shooting. Look, that's a new one. It landed recently. Poor bees. They will go crazy. We'll have honey with shrapnel this year.
Most of his neighbors have already left. Still, there are times when it's calm. 62-year-old Papai, another battlefield name, uses the opportunity to study Ukrainian.
I used to speak a mix of Ukrainian and Russian, but being a soldier in the Ukrainian army, I can't be Russian-speaking. That would be against my principles. Now I am transitioning to Ukrainian.
Not everybody wants to leave. It is because of his dog that 82-year-old Mykola Ivchenko says he is still here. He was injured by shrapnel the day before, but he wants to stay.
We'll live as long as the devil doesn't come after us.
Mykola has been working in Russia for many years. He says he has very few illusions about the fate of his village.
There is no way to beat Russia, but they continue to do everything to make things worse, even for themselves. I'm talking about the leadership, not the ordinary people. Ordinary Russians want the same thing as everybody else, a decent life.
At least for today, no shells have yet landed nearby. It is in the neighboring village that artillery has taken its toll today.
Matthias Bullinger in Kyiv. Why are people choosing to stay in the village, even though it looks like this war will last for some time?
Yeah, the authorities have warned people to leave the region already 2 months ago. They were expecting this amount of destruction and fierce fighting. But many people just don't want to leave. It's mostly elderly people that we've talked to who said either that they don't know what they will come to if they travel away. They don't have money, they don't have a place to stay. But there are also people whose whole family has evacuated. They've been evacuating their kids, their grandkids, but they themselves stay and they don't travel with them. Some of them just saying that it's their fate to be there, and they don't see why they should leave at their age, and they are saying, well, as this man, Mr. Ivchenko, has said, I'll be here until the devil comes after me. They often are saying things like, I was born here and I will die here, I have lived my life. It's just, often it's really old people who don't want another change in their life, and they'd rather face what is coming.
And just listening to what people were saying in that report, it does seem as though people are resigning themselves to the idea that Russia will take the east.
No, I wouldn't say that this is consistent. Some people are saying that are expecting that. I suppose nobody has said this openly to me, but there's always suspicion that some people there might even be waiting for Russia, a minority. But most people are saying, many people are saying, well, I have hope in the Ukrainian forces and it won't come to that point. And then when they're already under fire, they realize that the war is really coming where they are, and then some escape at the last minute. So I wouldn't say that people are really expecting Russia to come. Many are just saying, we don't know what's going to happen. It's not in our power. We'll just stay here because we've always been here.
OK, thank you for that. DW correspondent Matthias Bullinger in Kyiv. Well, relentless Russian shelling has reduced Ukrainian towns and cities to rubble, but there are ambitious plans in place to rebuild the country. Big-name architects have even offered to help the rebuilding the country's second-largest city, Kharkiv, as a carbon-neutral modern metropolis. First, though, residents have to come to terms with the scale of the destruction.
This is downtown Kharkiv. After months of Russian shelling, businesses, churches, houses, whole city blocks destroyed. With Russian forces repelled for now, people are returning, but rebuilding the city will be a monumental task. This team of foreign volunteers and local architects creates 3D models of the hundreds of monuments that have been damaged or destroyed in Kharkiv, documenting what was there for future rebuilding. No one thinks that will happen fast. I think it won't take just a year, more likely 2 years. The destruction is everywhere, but you should also consider that some of these buildings are architectural monuments. It's not basic repair work. Outside the capital, Kyiv, in the town of Kharkiv, people repair their houses by daylight and quit when night comes. As soon as Russian forces left the area, they got right to work. We have a plan to make small repairs, then to repair institutional buildings to be able to open schools and kindergartens for children for the new school year. Afterwards, we will rebuild private houses and housing blocks. But who will pay for it when the fighting is finally over? The Ukrainian economy is in ruins. The EU has pledged just under 10 billion euros to help. But that's a fraction of the estimated hundreds of billions needed to rebuild Ukraine's critical infrastructure, housing, vital services, and help the economy get up and running. There have been calls for a modern Marshall Plan, the US project that helped to rebuild Europe after World War II. But so far, not much commitment. There have also been calls to use frozen Russian assets, including yachts, to pay for reconstruction. But nothing's been agreed yet. Meanwhile, cities like Mariupol have been largely flattened and are still under Russian control. The Russian-installed government there has announced that the port city and former steel-making powerhouse will be rebuilt as a resort. Back in Kharkiv, people aren't waiting for their music hall to be refurbished.
Culture is the basis of everything. If culture had been more developed, people probably wouldn't be dying and there wouldn't be a war. Today, everyone realizes this. Maybe they were not so attentive to our cultural heritage before, but once you lose it, it hurts.
The end of the war may be a long way off, but in Kharkiv, people insist that life must go on.
Let's look at some of the issues surrounding the idea of rebuilding Ukraine with Tatyana de Regina. She's an associate professor of finance at the University of Illinois and part of the global collective Economists for Ukraine. She joins us from the French city of Toulouse. Welcome to DW. This seems like quite a tricky decision, the idea of starting reconstruction while a war is still raging and its outcome is still uncertain.
Yes, indeed. It is a very hard call to make, but given the large number of people who are still in eastern Ukraine, I think it's a necessity to start reconstruction now so that their basic needs can be provided for and try to secure those areas as best as we can.
And the money, that's the big thing. Where does that come from?
Yeah, so ideally, the money would come from Russia, as the creator of all this destruction. And the best proposal I have seen, which was actually a petition by economists, is to tax imports of Russian gas, which would reduce the revenue that the Russian government receives from the gas because of the difficulty of selling the gas to anybody else. Russia will have to accept lower prices, and then using that tax revenue to finance the rebuilding of Ukraine. But obviously there are other possibilities as well, like the European Union and the US channeling some aid to the reconstruction of Ukraine.
And the idea of using frozen Russian assets, that seems like quite a tricky one legally.
Yes, I can't speak to the legal aspects of using frozen Russian assets for this purpose, but certainly from an ethical standpoint, I think the people in power who are waging this war should lose their personal assets over it. And those assets should, just like in any civil suit, there should be due process. But I think just like we make people in civil suits pay damages for what they have done, we should hold those people responsible as leaders and as individuals for the destructions that they are contributing to.
That sounds like a sort of medium to long-term process, though, doesn't it? Because this war looks like it's going to continue for some months. Then it has to finish one way or the other. Then it has to be resolved, who has won, who has lost. And then, presuming that Russia loses, they have to then be dragged in front of some sort of international tribunal, fight the case, appeal it, and then actually agree to pay.
I'm not sure that that is necessary here. Given that the burden of proof in civil cases, and here I'm speaking outside of my expertise a little bit, but given that the burden of proof on civil cases is often lower than in criminal cases, I don't see any reasons why the proceedings against individuals whose assets have been frozen can't start now. And if they are found to be contributing to this war, which I think very clearly many of them are, then I don't see a problem, again, from an ethical standpoint or an economic standpoint, to use those assets to fund reconstruction of Ukraine right now.
That's very clear. Thank you so much for joining us, Tatyana de Regina, Associate Professor of Finance at the University of Illinois.
Thank you for having me.
Quick roundup of some other developments in this war. The UN says the Russia-Ukraine conflict could put up to 15 million people at risk of hunger this year. The two countries account for more than a third of global cereal exports. It's estimated that Ukraine's grain production may fall by more than 50% this season because of the conflict. President Zelenskyy says 200,000 children are among the Ukrainians who've been forcibly taken to Russia. In his video address, he claimed that children had been abducted from orphanages or taken with their parents. He added that Ukraine would punish those responsible. Former German Chancellor Angela Merkel has condemned Russia's war as barbaric and a blatant breach of international law. In her first public speech since stepping down from Parliament 6 months ago, she said she stood in solidarity with Ukraine. During her time as Chancellor, her government was often criticised for its Russia-friendly approach. EU diplomats have approved a new round of sanctions against Russia for its invasion of Ukraine after making concessions to Hungary. Monday saw the bloc agree a ban on most oil imports, including Hungarian opt-outs. The EU was able to make the deal after agreeing to Hungary's demand to drop the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill, from the bloc's blacklist. Let's go to DW correspondent Christine Mundwa in Brussels. Welcome, Christine. So tell us more about this last-minute deal.
Phil, it throws a spanner in the works as EU envoys were meeting for the formality procedure of taking that political agreement reached by EU leaders on Monday, agreeing on that sixth package of sanctions, taking that and putting it into legal text so that these sanctions can be enforced. The Hungarian ambassador then vetoed the blacklisting of Russia's most senior cleric, Patriarch Kirill. Now, the reason he is on the list is because, as the head of the Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill is very close to President Vladimir Putin. He's a close ally, a close supporter. He has backed the Russian invasion of Ukraine. In his sermons, he blames NATO and the West for it. So those are some of the reasons why he is on that list in the first place. Now, the Hungarians have insinuated at the fact that they don't want to be targeting religious figures in the blacklisting and in sanctions. But the key question is, why bring this up now when EU leaders were gathered at that summit on Monday, where they came out with this agreement? Prime Minister Viktor Orban didn't seem to raise the issue there. So this has come out as a bit of an ambush, again putting the Hungarians in the position where they are seen to be stalling the process of further targeting Russia by way of sanctions. Indeed, you will know this sixth package, Phil, took as long as it did because the Hungarians were lobbying against a ban on Russian oil. Now, for their part, they did secure extensive opt-outs. And now there is the feeling that the Hungarians have been given an inch and they're going to go for the yard. How far will they take this is the question now. Will they be able to get this sixth package of sanctions through? Will the EU ultimately remove Patriarch Kirill from that list, again, giving the Hungarians more than what others perhaps might be getting? So this is where things stand now, and we are listening to the discussion as it goes along, trying to get as much as we can out of that, because the Commission has told us that the discussion on this continues.
Thank you for that, Christine. Christine Mundwa in Brussels.